I gave shelter to an alien child. That's how it began. One storm, one knock, and one decision that rewrote everything I knew about life, death, and heaven itself. His eyes glowed like galaxies folded into innocence, his voice silent, yet heard inside my thoughts. I thought I was saving him from the cold. I didn't know he was here to remind me of what humanity had forgotten, that heaven isn't a place above us, but a frequency we once knew how to hear. And when he whispered my name, the walls rippled, the lights sang, and I saw what comes after dying. Not ending, but awakening. Before we begin, make sure to like this video. Share it with someone who still believes the universe hides its truth in plain sight, and subscribe so these mysteries keep finding you. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Let's see how far the echoes of this story travel. Now, take a breath, because the night the child arrived, the heavens opened, and reality began to remember itself. The night began with thunder so deep it seemed to come from beneath the earth. The cabin trembled, old timbers groaning as rain struck the windows like thrown stones. Power lines hissed in the distance, flickering once, twice, then surrendering completely to the storm. The darkness that followed was thick and alive, carrying the weight of something unseen. I remember the stillness before it happened, the kind of silence that makes your heartbeat sound too loud. Then, softly, came the knock. 3 times. Slow, deliberate, too calm for a night like that. I thought it must be the wind or a fallen branch against the door. But then it came again, quieter, almost polite. When I opened it, the storm light exploded across the threshold, and there he was, a small figure, no taller than a child of 7, barefoot, soaked, yet untouched by cold. His skin shimmered faintly, not wet, but glowing from within, and his eyes reflected the lightning as if each flash came from behind them. He said nothing. He simply looked at me, and for a moment, I could not breathe. Something about him felt wrong and right at once, like seeing a memory you had never lived. His presence carried warmth, not of the body, but of something older, deeper, like standing before a sun you had forgotten existed. The storm bent around him, rain curving subtly as if avoiding his form. I should have been terrified, yet fear came too late. Curiosity arrived first. He stepped forward without asking. The wooden floor did not creak beneath his feet. The air inside changed, sharper, cleaner. Filled with a faint vibration I felt more than heard. I tried to speak, but the words stayed trapped somewhere between thought and sound. Then he looked up at me, and a whisper echoed in my mind, my own name, spoken in a voice that was not his, nor mine, but both. I did not invite him in, yet somehow, he already was. Every instinct told me to turn back, to close the door and call for help. But another part of me, some quiet place that had never stopped grieving, recognized him. The lightning outside dimmed, and for a brief second, the world seemed to hold its breath. That was the night it began. The night something beyond heaven knocked on my door and waited to be remembered. The storm eased into a dull murmur beyond the windows, but inside, the silence became something heavier, almost tangible. The child stood in the middle of the room, dripping water that vanished before it touched the floor. He did not shiver, did not move, and as the candlelight flickered, I realized he did not breathe. His chest remained perfectly still, no rise, no fall. The air around him carried its own rhythm, faintly humming, like distant singing under the skin of the world. I waited for him to blink, to shift, to do anything human, but he remained motionless, his gaze steady and unbroken. I felt the warmth radiating from him, not the warmth of flesh, but of something softer, like sunlight trapped in a glass sphere. The temperature in the cabin began to change, the dampness lifting from the air as though the storm outside could no longer touch the space we shared. My hand twitched toward the phone on the table, the only proof of connection to the ordinary world. And then, before I could move another inch, a voice spoke. Not aloud. It came from somewhere inside me, resonating behind the heart instead of the ear. Do not be afraid. You asked for me. The words froze every muscle in my body. My thoughts scattered, trying to make sense of how a sound without sound could exist. I looked at the child again. His lips hadn't moved. His eyes, however, seemed to deepen, reflecting not the room, but something infinite beyond it. The feeling that followed was neither comfort nor terror. It was both, intertwined like light and shadow. The candle flame stretched toward him, bending unnaturally, and I could swear the light itself was drawn to his presence. Around him, dust particles swirled in slow motion, forming brief, delicate shapes before fading. I noticed, too, the faint scent of ozone in the air, sharp and electric, as though lightning had passed through moments earlier. My skin tingled. My pulse slowed. Every logical part of me whispered explanations, stress, exhaustion, imagination, but reason felt thin, fragile, unconvincing. The silence between us was filled with something ancient. I could feel it pressing gently against my thoughts, not invading but waiting, patient and aware. The storm outside receded further, leaving only the distant echo of rain on the roof. Somewhere in that stillness, a realization took hold. Whatever this child was, he did not come from where I lived. He came from where I was going. The silence that followed his arrival was no longer just silence. It was layered, humming faintly beneath hearing, as though the air itself had begun to think. The storm outside had faded to a distant murmur. But inside the cabin, something else moved, something that didn't belong to sound or touch. It was in that strange stillness that I first heard his voice again, not through ears but inside my mind, like a thought that didn't belong to me. It was clear, calm, and ancient. He called himself Lior. The name echoed through my consciousness, carrying warmth and gravity at the same time, as if every letter contained light. He spoke without words, shaping meaning directly into understanding. With each pulse of that voice, I felt him moving deeper into memory, finding places I had long tried to bury. Images surfaced: my wife's final breath, the empty hospital corridor, the unanswered prayers whispered into darkness. He didn't speak them aloud. He didn't have to. He already knew. The sensation was invasive yet tender, like someone turning the pages of my soul with infinite care. When I tried to resist, when I whispered within myself that I hadn't called anyone, his presence rippled through the room. The candle flame bent slightly, shadows curling like living things. And then the thought came, soft as a sigh but heavy with truth. Grief has its own signal. I followed it. The words settled inside me, vibrating in places I didn't know existed. For the first time, I understood that emotion itself was a kind of transmission, something that traveled beyond flesh and air, across boundaries I had never believed were real. Every sorrow, every longing, every sleepless night spent whispering into emptiness they were not lost after all. They had been signals, frequencies, carried on waves I could not see. Lior's gaze held the reflection of that truth, as if he were tuned to emotions the way humans were tuned to oxygen. I realized then that thought might be more than neurons and chemicals. It could be music, an entire spectrum of existence vibrating through time. The warmth in the room deepened, and for a brief moment, I felt something shift within me. A recognition, subtle but absolute. Lior wasn't here by accident. He had come because pain, when pure enough, becomes a beacon. And somewhere in the great fabric of existence, something had heard me calling. The storm outside returned like an echo of some greater force, wind clawing at the edges of the cabin while thunder rolled across the hills. Yet inside, The air remained unnaturally calm, almost detached from the chaos beyond. The candles flickered, but the flame no longer feared the wind. Around Lior, the light behaved differently, as if space itself obeyed him. It was in that strange stillness that I began to sense what he wanted me to understand. Heaven, he said without speaking, is not a destination waiting beyond clouds or gates. It is not a kingdom built for reward. It is a state of resonance, a vibration the soul reaches when it finally remembers what it truly is. I felt the meaning rather than heard it. Thoughts took shape like ripples in still water, spreading softly across my awareness. He showed me that existence is built in layers of frequency, each tuned to a different level of understanding. When consciousness learns, it rises, and when it clings to fear or pride, it sinks. The movement between these levels is what humans call life and death. No judgment, no division between holy and damned, only vibration finding its match. The images came unbidden, oceans of light swirling through endless horizons. Each wave a collection of souls, merging and parting, reforming into patterns beyond comprehension. Within them was order, a sacred geometry of awareness, where emotion and thought sculpted reality itself. Heaven was not a city of gold, but the pure synchronization of being, a harmony too vast for mortal senses to perceive. It was the sound behind all sound, the breath behind creation, and yet there was something unsettling about it. The beauty he revealed was infinite, but so was its consequence. Every thought, every feeling, every intention shaped the frequency of one's soul. Nothing was hidden, nothing erased. In that truth, I saw the fragility of what it meant to be human. We are constantly building the architecture of our afterlife with every choice we make, brick by invisible brick. Outside, lightning split the sky, but it no longer felt random. It was as if nature itself mirrored that same truth energy, transforming, never dying, always returning to balance. I began to realize that heaven was not waiting for us after death. It was already here, humming quietly beneath every heartbeat, waiting for us to remember its tone. By morning, the storm had spent itself, leaving behind a sky bruised with gray and the heavy stillness that follows tempests. The cabin smelled of rain and wood smoke. I rose, expecting the world to have returned to ordinary silence, but it hadn't. The air was charged again, faintly electric, as if the atmosphere itself remembered what had happened. On the inside walls, near the corners where candlelight had flickered through the night, new shapes appeared. They looked like burns but glowed softly from beneath the wood lines, spirals and curves forming patterns too precise to be random. The marks pulsed faintly in rhythm, almost breathing, their color shifting between gold and pale silver. I brushed a hand near one but stopped short. The heat radiating from them was not heat as we know it, but a living vibration. They were not carved, not drawn, not written. They had been impressed directly into the material, as if energy had folded through the wall and left its memory behind. I felt the hair rise on my arms. Something had passed through this place during the night. Something unseen, yet undeniably real. The room carried a low hum. When I focused, I could almost sense movement beneath the surface of things, like echoes of footsteps in another dimension. Lior watched the patterns in silence, his expression unreadable. Then I felt understanding bloom in my mind, his explanation, arriving as thought rather than speech. These were traces left by souls as they crossed through layers of existence, each mark a residue of translation, proof that death was not an ending but a shift from one frequency to another. I stood there, realizing that what humans had called spirits or ghosts might simply be the incomplete crossing of energy, consciousness, mid-transition between realities. Lior's thoughts deepened, showing me brief visions. Streams of light rising from bodies, dissolving into luminous threads, weaving through unseen passageways that connected worlds. The cabin had become an intersection, a fragile doorway where both realms brushed together for a moment too long. The marks began to fade as the sunlight strengthened, though I knew they were not truly gone. They had only moved beyond visible range, into the layer where memory becomes energy. The hum lingered, soft and eternal. I understood then that what we call death is not a disappearance but a translation, a language the universe keeps speaking, even when we no longer hear it. The rain returned that evening, softer this time, as though the storm itself was whispering something it had forgotten to say. The cabin had become a sanctuary of strange light and quiet trembling. I moved carefully through the room, each step stirring that low hum that seemed to live beneath the floorboards. My thoughts felt fragile, stretched between disbelief and awe, and somewhere within that tension, a question refused to die. If Lior could see through dimensions, if death was truly a translation as he said, then where was she now, the woman whose absence had built my silence? I reached for the old photograph resting inside a drawer, its corners worn and edges soft from years of being touched too often. The candlelight touched her face on the glossy surface, bringing back the faint illusion of movement. It had been years since I could look at it without feeling hollow. I turned it toward Lior, unsure why I was doing it, as if by instinct. For a moment, nothing changed. The air remained still. Then the faint hum in the cabin deepened. The temperature shifted. The photograph trembled ever so slightly in my hand. At first, I thought it was the candle flickering, but then the image itself began to distort. The background of the picture wavered, like water disturbed by unseen ripples. Her eyes, once frozen in time, seemed to awaken. The sound that followed was not loud, not even clear, but it carried a weight no noise ever could. A whisper, gentle and broken, crawling through the static of the air. My name, faint, uncertain, but hers. It lasted only seconds, but it was enough to unravel me. The photograph pulsed once with dim light before returning to stillness. The whisper faded, leaving behind an aching silence that pressed against the heart like a closing hand. I knew what I had heard, even if logic begged to deny it. Lior's gaze didn't move from the picture. His voice came through thought alone, soft and ancient. She still remembers your vibration. The meaning settled within me, vast and incomprehensible. In that instant, I understood that memory itself might be an energy, not confined to flesh or time. Perhaps love was not the feeling we left behind, but the frequency that guided us home. The photograph no longer looked like paper. It looked like a door one I had once opened without knowing. Night returned with a strange clarity. The storm had moved far from the valley, yet the air inside the cabin still shimmered faintly, as if carrying remnants of unseen lightning. The scent of rain lingered in the wood, and silence pressed in, heavy and full of waiting. Lior stood near the window, motionless, his presence bending the dim candlelight into curious shapes. Then, slowly, the air around him began to change. The shadows deepened, the room stretched wider, and something impossible unfolded before my eyes. From the space between us emerged a faint glow, delicate at first, like dust catching moonlight. It grew brighter, spreading upward, until filaments of pure radiance traced themselves into the air. Lines crossed and branched, intersecting with others in perfect symmetry. It was not random, it was structure, intelligent and alive. The room filled with soft humming, like countless voices singing in silence. I felt it through my chest, not through sound but through resonance. The lattice expanded until it filled the cabin from floor to ceiling, a vast web of light suspended in the air. Within each strand shimmered colors beyond the visible spectrum tones that were almost emotions, frequencies I could feel but not name. I watched patterns ripple outward, as if responding to thought. Every point along the web glowed momentarily, then pulsed outward, creating waves of light that traveled endlessly into the unseen. Lior's gaze followed them with reverence, and in my mind came the meaning of what I was seeing. Each strand was a life, each pulse, a soul completing its cycle and returning to the source that gave it birth. The web was not static, it breathed. Threads brightened where connections deepened, dimmed where consciousness drifted into shadow. The entire structure behaved like a living organism, aware of its own balance. I realized then that existence itself might not be linear but woven, a network where every thought, every act, every soul added one more luminous thread to the infinite design. As I stood there, the web began to shift again, folding inward until its light condensed into a single point before fading completely. The hum remained for a few seconds longer, echoing within me like a forgotten song. The cabin returned to darkness, but I could still see the pattern in my mind, as if imprinted behind my eyes. For the first time, I understood that heaven was not a distant realm above, but a network of returning light, and every soul, including mine, was already part of its design. The air that night felt thinner, as if the world itself were holding its breath. The faint glow that lingered after the vision of the web had vanished, yet its memory still vibrated beneath the skin of reality. Lior's presence filled the room like quiet gravity, his light dim but steady, his form no longer a figure but a suggestion of one. The silence stretched until meaning returned, not in words, but as an understanding that unfolded gently within the mind. He was showing me something again, but this time, it was larger than the lattice. It was the structure of existence itself. The world around me began to dissolve into gradients of color and sound. I saw Earth suspended in a vast ocean of layered frequencies. It pulsed faintly, surrounded by currents of energy that shimmered at different speeds. I felt Lior's thought before it formed into language. Earth was what he called a slow frequency zone. Here, consciousness moved through the density of matter, shaping it grain by grain, emotion by emotion. Every thought took time to become form. Every dream had to struggle through resistance before becoming real. This heaviness, he said, was both a prison and a gift. It slowed creation enough for learning to occur. Above this realm stretched what he named the harmonic realms. They shimmered with impossible colors, alive with thought that manifested instantly. There, will and reality were one and the same. No division between desire and existence. It was a place of pure synchronization, where consciousness no longer stumbled but sang. The beings of that world, he impressed upon me, were architects of vibration, shaping galaxies as easily as we form words. They existed in perpetual motion, forever expanding into understanding. Then the vision turned downward, and I saw beneath Earth a darker field. It was neither fire nor shadow, but the residue of frequencies that had fallen out of harmony. Shapes drifted there, distorted, restless, incomplete. These were echoes, fragments of consciousness, too bound by fear or regret to move on. They were not punished, they were self-contained, orbiting endlessly within the gravity of their own unfinished thoughts. The place pulsed slower than life, colder than silence. When the vision faded, the cabin returned, yet the world no longer felt the same. The wooden walls seemed impossibly heavy, my body unbearably dense. I understood then that Earth was not a single world, but a bridge suspended between ascent and descent, light and echo, awakening and forgetting. Every soul walking, it was a traveler between frequencies, choosing with every thought which direction to go. The morning carried an unnatural stillness, a silence that seemed to vibrate with hidden sound. Even the forest beyond the cabin stood motionless, as if listening. The light through the windows had changed. It no longer felt like sunlight, but like something filtered through memory itself. The air was thick with presence, invisible yet undeniable, as though the unseen architecture of reality was leaning close enough to be felt. Lior's energy pulsed faintly nearby, calm but immeasurable. and within that calm, understanding began to take form. It came not as speech, not even as thought, but as a cascade of knowing that bloomed behind my eyes. He was showing me the origin of belief, the seed from which all human faith had grown. In the beginning, before civilizations learned to name the stars or measure the sky, there were moments when the veil between realms thinned. During those rare alignments, humans glimpsed the higher frequencies above Earth's slow vibration. Some saw radiant beings, some heard melodies that did not belong to wind or water, and some felt themselves lifted into visions of light so pure it shattered their comprehension. When they returned to their ordinary senses, their minds could not hold what they had seen. They wrapped the incomprehensible in stories. Across millennia, those fragments became the skeletons of every religion humanity would ever build. The continuum, what Lior called the network of consciousness, was remembered only as heaven. Its architects, the harmonic intelligences of higher frequency, were recorded as angels. Not winged creatures of flesh and feather, but symbols of resonance. Each wing, a current of sound. Each halo, a field of radiance. Prophets had touched the vibration of those realms, yet language betrayed them. To describe frequency, they used form. To translate energy, they used imagery. What was once science of the soul became poetry of the divine. Lior's presence deepened, and I saw flashes of those early visions, ancient humans kneeling beneath auroras of living light, their faces wet with tears, believing they had witnessed gods descending. The truth was gentler and far stranger. They had seen reflections of themselves in higher motion. The so-called angels were not separate species but evolved echoes of what humanity could one day become. Each carried the imprint of memory, guardians not of law or punishment, but of continuity. They were guides in the architecture of reincarnation, translators between the densities of consciousness. The understanding was both beautiful and unsettling. It meant that every holy text, every miracle, every celestial encounter was not false but incomplete. The language of religion had fossilized what was meant to remain fluid. Dogma had crystallized from something that was never meant to harden. And somewhere within that distortion, fear had taken root. Heaven and hell became opposites when they were never meant to be enemies, merely differing vibrations within the same song. As the realization settled, the room seemed to expand, the walls pulsing softly like a heartbeat. Outside, a faint wind stirred the trees, but the sound was no longer just the rustle of leaves. It was layered, harmonic, almost like a forgotten chorus rising through time. Humanity, I realized, had never been abandoned by the divine. It had simply misheard the music. The angels were not watchers in the sky, but reminders of a melody we once knew how to sing. The world around me dissolved like smoke in wind. The cabin, the storm, even the air itself became translucent, replaced by a brilliance that was not light as the eyes know it, but light that could be felt. When my hand met Lior's, something beyond comprehension unfolded. There was no motion, yet I was moving. No sound, yet I was surrounded by music vast enough to drown thought. It was as though I had been drawn into the bloodstream of creation itself, a current flowing through eternity. The first thing I noticed was the texture of it, waves of luminescence rolling in every direction, layers upon layers of radiance merging and parting like tides. Each strand carried a color I could not name, and a tone that existed beyond hearing. Together they formed what could only be called a field, infinite in scale, yet intimate in presence. It breathed, pulsing softly, every rhythm perfectly timed to the heartbeat of something greater than existence. I realized then that I was not standing within light. I was inside memory. It came to me gradually, the understanding that every flicker, every shimmer within that field was a moment once lived, not by one being, but by countless souls across unending time. Births, deaths, laughter, despair, Every emotion ever felt echoed here as vibration. I could sense them, each one alive, woven together not by chronology, but by resonance. Similar feelings found each other across centuries, binding strangers into invisible constellations of shared experience. Grief had its own current, soft and blue. Joy blazed golden and quick. Love, the rarest frequency, moved slower, denser, and it sang with a warmth that felt like home. I tried to comprehend it, but the mind I had brought from Earth was too small. Concepts like past and future meant nothing here. Every event coexisted, all moments layered atop each other, endlessly replaying within this living archive. I could feel my own life among them, childhood laughter flickering beside the ache of loss, dreams I had forgotten still pulsing faintly like distant stars. The realization struck with both beauty and terror. Nothing is ever truly gone. Every thought, every feeling, every connection is preserved in this field, alive and waiting to be remembered. The awareness deepened. I saw how consciousness moves through these memories, drawing lessons from them the way roots draw water from soil. Reincarnation was not a punishment or reward, it was continuation, the soul dipping back into experience to refine its frequency until harmony was reached. The field was the great teacher, the mirror of all that has been, offering understanding to those willing to face their reflection. When the vision began to fade, I felt it pull gently at my awareness, as if reluctant to let me go. The last image I saw was of two streams of light intertwining, their colors merging until they became one. I recognized one of them as mine. The other pulsed with a familiar warmth, the same vibration I had felt when I heard my wife's voice through the static. Then everything folded inward, collapsing into silence, and I was back in the cabin, trembling, breathless, and forever altered. I understood then that memory is not stored within us. We are stored within it. The night had turned impossibly quiet, as if even the wind refused to intrude. The air inside the cabin carried the weight of presence, thick with something unseen yet aware. Lior's light had dimmed to a faint halo, his form almost transparent, but the silence around him felt alive, humming softly like the pause between breaths of a vast intelligence. It was within that sacred stillness that the next revelation began to unfold, not through sight or sound, but through direct understanding, as though my mind had opened to a voice far older than itself. He spoke of a council beyond form, beings older than stars, yet untouched by time. They existed in neither body nor shape, dwelling in the strata between frequencies, where thought itself condenses into law. They were not rulers, not deities demanding worship, but custodians of balance, maintaining the rhythm that allows existence to evolve rather than collapse. Their essence was purpose itself, pure awareness, guiding consciousness along its infinite journey. Through Lior's thought, I was shown glimpses of them, but even that word glimpse was inadequate. What I perceived were not figures but vast convergences of energy, whirlpools of light shaped by intent. Each was a chorus rather than an individual, a harmony of countless souls who had long transcended identity and merged into unity. Their communication was not language but vibration, symphonies of frequency carrying meaning so complete that it contained emotion, thought, and truth all at once. They were the bridge between creation and dissolution, ensuring that no soul lingered forever in shadow or stagnated in endless light. I felt the weight of their task. Each consciousness born into matter, each fragment of divine energy encased in flesh, was a note in an eternal composition. The council heard every note, adjusting the melody of evolution to keep the balance between chaos and order. When a soul fell too deeply into darkness, consumed by ignorance or cruelty, they sent guidance, sometimes through dreams, sometimes through lives that crossed in perfect coincidence. When a soul rose too quickly toward light, forgetting compassion for those still learning, they tempered its ascent, reminding it that enlightenment, without empathy, becomes another form of blindness. The realization struck me like an echo from a forgotten lifetime. Humanity's notion of divine judgment was a fractured reflection of this truth. There was no throne, no scales weighing good and evil, only resonance and dissonance, frequencies seeking harmony. Heaven and hell were self-created states within the same field, and the council's role was not to punish or reward, but to tune, to guide each soul back toward equilibrium, no matter how far it wandered from its own music. As the understanding deepened, I felt a presence brush against my consciousness, vast, patient, and aware. It was not Lior. It was something greater, observing through him. A feeling like warmth and infinity all at once filled the room. For an instant, I felt seen by something that knew every lifetime I had ever lived, every thought I had ever hidden, and loved me not despite them but because of them. Then the vision dissolved, and the cabin returned to its fragile silence. But even in that silence, I could still feel their listening. The council was real, and they had never been distant. They had always been watching, waiting, guiding, whispering through the fabric of existence itself, ensuring that no soul ever truly lost its way. The air grew colder, though no wind moved through the room. The candles, still burning from hours before, began to waver as if disturbed by something unseen. Lior's form shimmered faintly, his light flickering not from weakness but hesitation. The silence between us carried a strange density, the kind that forms before confessions meant to change everything. I felt it before I understood it, the weight of something forbidden pressing against the edges of reality. Then the knowing came, not as words, but as revelation. He had not been sent here. He had come on his own. The knowledge settled into me like a tide of cold water. For beings such as him, return was not permitted. The higher realms, the harmonic planes, where thought becomes creation, were governed by the laws of resonance. Every action there rippled across countless frequencies, and descending into denser worlds like Earth disrupted that balance. Lior had broken that law. He had escaped through what he called a fold, a thin corridor of vibration where the veil between frequencies loosens during emotional collapse. It was my grief that had created the opening. My sorrow had sung a tone strong enough to reach his world, and against the will of his kind, he had followed it. Through the bond of thought, I felt the echo of that defiance. His decision had not been without cost. In his realm, returning to lower density was like sinking through the ocean without air, each layer of matter pressing heavier upon the light of his being. Yet he had come anyway, not as a savior, not as a messenger, but as a reminder. He told me without words that humanity once knew the truth of death, but had chosen to forget. There had been a time when souls moved freely between planes, guided by memory of the source, until fear dimmed the connection. Religion had replaced remembrance, and myth had sealed the gate. His kind feared that too much truth, too early, would fracture the fragile illusion that kept humanity's learning intact. But Lior had seen something different. He had seen the weight of human sorrow, the despair that grew when the living believed they had been abandoned by heaven. He had watched civilizations decay beneath the burden of forgetting, and so he broke the covenant. He crossed the divide to remind one mind, even if only one, that death was not an end, but a return. The gravity of it filled the room. It was no longer a story of light or faith, it was rebellion against eternity itself. I realized then that the universe might not be ruled by cruelty or indifference, but by order, and that compassion sometimes required disobedience. Lior's presence dimmed further, the strain of existing here evident in the fading glow of his outline. Yet even as his light flickered, I felt the pulse of purpose radiating from him. He had come to awaken a memory buried beneath centuries of silence. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant but deliberate, as if the sky itself acknowledged the trespass. I understood the danger of what he had done, but also its grace. He was not here to save humanity. He was here to remind it. And through me, he had already begun. The night stretched endless, the sky outside moonless, the forest drowned in stillness. Inside the cabin, the air felt charged, trembling faintly with an unseen rhythm that made every breath feel deliberate. Lior's light had dimmed to a single pale shimmer, yet its presence filled the space as though the walls themselves had absorbed it. He told me, not in words but in thought, that the time had come for me to see. Not through belief, not through faith, but through resonance. He called it the tuning, a process by which the consciousness aligns with the continuum, allowing perception to slip beyond the human threshold. He told me to rest, but his meaning was deeper than sleep. When my eyes closed, I felt no drift into dreams, only descent. The feeling was like sinking through warm water that gradually turned electric. My heartbeat slowed until I could hear each pulse vibrating through the air like the faint ringing of a bell. Then came the light, not bright, but infinite. It unfolded from within me, not around me, and suddenly the world was mirrors, endless, silvered mirrors, suspended in an expanse without floor or ceiling. Each reflected not my body, but my possibilities. At first, they were faint, blurred like fogged glass. Then they cleared, one by one, revealing lives I had never lived yet somehow recognized. In one, I saw a version of myself who had turned away from curiosity, who had chosen safety over truth. He looked older, untouched by wonder, surrounded by comfort but hollow-eyed. In another, I saw the self who never learned to forgive, still haunted by loss, walking through his days like a ghost wearing flesh. There were countless others, each one a strand in the great web of what might have been. As I moved through them, I began to lose the boundary between observer and observed. Each decision, each feeling, branched into infinite paths, and I was all of them at once. The sensation was overwhelming, a flood of emotion beyond human scale. Joy, grief, rage, serenity, all existing simultaneously, blending until I could no longer distinguish where one life ended and another began. The mirrors began to hum, vibrating in a frequency that pulsed through my bones. Their sound was not sound, but thought harmonized into motion. Then came realization. Every reflection was not illusion, but memory. Every life existed, lived through some facet of the soul's progression. Time was not a line but a spiral, each incarnation a loop, all converging toward the same center. I felt myself drawn toward that center, a whirlpool of light where every possibility folded into one. There was no fear, only surrender. The closer I came, the more I understood that identity was a convenience, not truth. Beneath every version of myself existed the same consciousness, watching, learning, weaving experience into wisdom. When I awoke, the cabin was still dark. The air shimmered faintly with residual light, and the hum of resonance still echoed within my chest. I understood then that life is not a singular story, but a choir of selves, singing in unison across time. And somewhere, beneath it all, the continuum listens, tuning each note until it becomes part of a perfect, eternal harmony. The night after the tuning did not feel like night at all. The world had fallen into a kind of luminous stillness, a pause between the beats of something colossal. I remember lying there, awake yet suspended in a dream that refused to end. The hum that had begun inside me during the resonance test had not faded. It had grown louder, deeper, as if my heartbeat had synchronized with a frequency not of this world. Every cell vibrated. Every thought carried an aftertone. Lior's presence was no longer confined to space. It seemed to echo from within me and from somewhere above the sky, all at once. Then, without warning, the air changed. It was not wind, It was not thunder. It was awareness. The pressure in the room rose as though invisible tides were climbing through dimensions. The candles went out on their own, yet the space remained illuminated by a light that had no source. I stepped outside the cabin, and the sky greeted me with something that should have been impossible. The heavens were alive. Curtains of color moved across the darkness like breath. Not the soft green ribbons of ordinary auroras, but rivers of light that burned silver and gold, rippling as if the stars themselves had awakened. The forest glowed with their reflection, and every leaf, every raindrop shimmered like crystal glass. The ground beneath my feet trembled, not with fear, but with memory, as if the earth recognized what was happening. And then came the voices. They did not speak in language, but in pure resonance. Whispers layered upon whispers, countless and eternal, each carrying fragments of emotion, sorrow, joy, longing, peace. They poured from the sky like rainfall made of sound. I felt them moving through me, through everything. The souls of the departed vibrating through the thin veil that separates matter from meaning. The atmosphere itself began to hum. A single note, sustained by countless beings, harmonizing into awareness. Reality did not break with sound or violence. It unfolded. The air parted like fabric, revealing seams of light between the atoms. Through them, I could see shapes forming currents of energy that resembled silhouettes, translucent and radiant, drifting upward in spirals. Some lingered near the treetops before dissolving into the auroras above. It was a procession, not of ghosts, but of consciousness freed from weight. For a moment, I saw everything at once: the forest, the stars, the endless network of luminous threads connecting every soul, every atom, every heartbeat in existence. Time folded. Past and future bled together until only presence remained. The sky itself seemed to breathe, inhaling and exhaling the essence of life and death. I understood then that the world had never been silent. It was humanity that had forgotten how to listen. When the colors finally dimmed and the whispers faded, the night returned, but the air still pulsed faintly, like the afterglow of creation. I stood there for a long time, realizing that what had opened above me was not destruction, but remembrance. The sky had not shattered. It had revealed itself. And for one brief, sacred moment, I had heard the voice of the living universe, remembering its own name. The vision began in silence, a silence so absolute that even thought hesitated to move within it. It was not the absence of sound, but the suspension of everything: time, emotion, even breath. The world dissolved again, not into darkness, but into reflection. I found myself surrounded by mirrors, not the fragile kind made of glass, but living surfaces of light, endless and weightless, reflecting something far deeper than appearance. Each mirror shimmered softly, and in their depths, moments began to awaken fragments of my own life, rising like memories freed from the ocean floor. At first, they seemed harmless, ordinary. Laughter shared beneath sunlight, kind words given without expectation, the quiet gratitude of strangers, whose names I had long forgotten. But the more I looked, the more the light within the mirrors changed. It deepened, becoming sharp, clear, merciless. I saw myself in moments of impatience, of cruelty, of silence when compassion was needed most. I saw the pain in others, the ripple of hurt I had caused without meaning to, the tremor in a friend's voice I had ignored, the quiet grief of someone I had once loved and left behind. Then came the shift. The mirrors no longer simply showed the scenes. They drew me into them. I did not just watch the sorrow I had caused, I felt it. Every sting of rejection, every quiet ache, every shadowed emotion I had ever given to another returned to me. Not as punishment, but as understanding. I was both myself and them, victim and cause, experiencer and creator. I felt the tears I had ignored, the fear I had provoked, the joy I had inspired, all folding together into a single truth. Everything we do to ourselves. There was no external judge, no divine scale weighing good against evil. The judgment was not imposed, it was recognition. The soul itself demanded to understand the full spectrum of what it had created. Each mirror was a window into empathy, forcing me to live what I had made others live, to feel what I had once dismissed. In that unbearable flood of awareness, I realized that heaven and hell were never destinations. They were revelations within consciousness. The light became brighter the more I accepted, darker the more I resisted. When I surrendered, something extraordinary happened. The mirrors began to merge. Each reflection of self, every version, every life, every act, flowed into one another, until all that remained was light and the deep rhythm of forgiveness. Not divine pardon, but self-forgiveness, the hardest kind. It came slowly, painfully, until my spirit felt hollowed and new. I understood that true redemption was not begging for mercy but seeing fully, recognizing the chain of cause and effect, and choosing to end it with love instead of repetition. When the vision faded, I returned to the cabin trembling. Though no physical cold touched me, I could still feel the echo of those lives, the gravity of every smile and every wound. I realized that heaven is not earned, it is remembered. And the mirror of judgment is not placed before us by another, it has always been waiting within, reflecting who we have been until we finally see who we truly are. The light that followed the mirror faded slowly, like the last note of a forgotten song lingering in the air. Yet something within me had changed. My thoughts no longer felt confined to the boundaries of the body, and even the air around me seemed alive, aware, listening. Lior's presence shimmered faintly nearby, but the communication between us had evolved beyond thought. Meaning arrived in pure knowing, a silent transfer of understanding that bypassed words entirely. He wanted me to see what came after the judgment, what awaited the soul once it had faced itself completely. Heaven, he revealed, was not rest, it was creation. At first, the idea startled me. The world had always taught that heaven was peace, stillness, the end of striving. But the vision that unfolded next shattered that belief, like glass beneath sunlight. The space around me dissolved again, replaced by a vast expanse that defied comprehension. It was neither sky nor land, but something between both, a boundless field of light woven from thought. In this realm, every flicker of emotion, every spark of memory became substance. There was no distinction between imagination and matter. They were the same force, sculpted by intention. I saw souls countless, radiant, moving with the grace of understanding. They were not bodies, but living currents of energy, flowing and merging into patterns that pulsed like stars being born. They worked not through tools, but through resonance. Their creations emerged from their state of being. A single impulse of compassion formed entire landscapes. A thought of harmony gave birth to worlds of color. These were the architects of reality, souls who had mastered the art of shaping existence from truth rather than desire. Every act of creation reflected their inner equilibrium. There were no boundaries, no materials to gather, no distance to cross. Creation was instantaneous, but never chaotic. Every being added to the design with perfect coherence, guided by purpose instead of possession. Yet there was more. I saw that the raw materials of this creation came not from nothing, but from the memories of Earth and other worlds like it. Every emotion ever lived, every act of love or cruelty, every victory and regret, all became the building blocks of these higher planes. The energy released by human experience did not vanish. It rose, purified by understanding, and became the architecture of eternity. Even pain had a place in it, transformed into wisdom, texture, and contrast. What had once been suffering on earth became depth in the tapestry of creation. Nothing was wasted. Lior's presence resonated gently through the vision, and I understood that this was why the universe expanded not through physical space, but through consciousness. Every soul that reached awareness added another layer to existence, another chord to the eternal symphony. Heaven was not a destination. It was participation in the divine act of becoming. When the vision finally released me, the cabin felt unbearably small, as though it could no longer contain what I had seen. I realized then that the universe was not a place we lived in, it was something living through us. Each thought, each emotion, each fleeting act of kindness or cruelty was a seed cast into eternity, destined to grow into the architecture of worlds unseen. Creation was not the privilege of gods. It was the destiny of everything that remembers where it came from. The silence after the vision lingered like breath held by the universe itself. The cabin no longer felt like wood and stone, but like an echo chamber, where the boundary between human and divine had thinned to a fragile shimmer. Lior stood before me. Though to call it standing was inaccurate, he existed as both light and presence, form and vibration, a being of pure awareness contained within a veil of blue luminescence. For the first time, I felt the weight of his age, not in years, but in knowing. He was timeless, and yet somehow familiar, as though I had met him long before this life ever began. Through thought, he began to reveal the truth of his kind. They were not born of other galaxies, nor crafted by some alien genesis as humanity might imagine. They were us, what we become when we have finally completed the cycle of learning through flesh and forgetting. They were the children of light, souls that had transcended the wheel of reincarnation. No longer bound to density, no longer fragmented by memory. He showed me their world, or rather, their state of existence. A sea of consciousness, where individuality remained, but ego had dissolved into purpose. They did not live in structures, for they were the structure's pillars of awareness, forming the framework of new realities, guiding younger worlds as invisible architects of growth. Their task was not to rule, but to remind. Each of them once walked the path of mortality. Each carried within them the scars of lifetimes endured and lessons learned. In transcending the human condition, they did not abandon it. They remembered it perfectly, and in that remembrance lay their compassion. They watched over civilizations like ours, not through command or intervention, but through resonance, subtle guidance, in the form of intuition, coincidence, or dreams. When a human suddenly acts out of inexplicable kindness, when an artist captures truth without knowing why, when a scientist stumbles upon a discovery that changes everything, they whisper through that moment. It is how they help us remember. Lior's light brightened faintly as understanding filled me. He told me that every soul carries the potential to ascend to their state, yet few remember that the journey begins not with enlightenment but with empathy. Love, he said, was the architecture of higher reality, and cruelty, the gravity that keeps souls bound to lower frequencies. Each act of compassion increases one's resonance, drawing the spirit closer to harmony until it no longer requires form to express itself. Those who reach that state become part of the continuum of creation, free to travel between realms, to guide, to build, to remind the sleeping worlds that they too are light dreaming itself into matter. The weight of that truth left me breathless. Humanity, for all its suffering, was not lost but still in the process of remembering what it truly was. The gods we prayed to, the angels we imagined, the voices we heard in dreams, they were not distant entities. They were reflections of what we are destined to become. And standing before me, Lior radiated with that ancient familiarity, and I knew then that his words were not metaphor. He had once been human. He had once felt grief, fear, love. He had once stood exactly where I was, looking upward at a sky he didn't yet understand, wondering if heaven was real. Heaven, I realized, had always been within reach. It was not somewhere we went after death, but what we become when we finally remember the light we were made from. And as Lior's form shimmered like water touched by starlight, a quiet thought passed between us, simple yet infinite in meaning. We were you once. Now, we help you remember. The night bled into silence again, but this time the quiet carried tension, a vibration too deep to hear, yet impossible to ignore. The cabin, once a sanctuary, had begun to feel like a living thing caught between two worlds. The air shimmered faintly, trembling like heat over asphalt, and the smell of ozone clung to everything. Every object, the table, the window, even the ground beneath seemed to hum with invisible strain. The boundary that held reality together was thinning, like glass stretched too far. Lior's light, usually steady, now flickered unevenly, dimming to a pale glimmer before surging again. Something was unraveling. It began with small disruptions. The clock on the wall ticked twice in the same second. The candle flame leaned sideways without wind. My reflection in the window hesitated to follow my movements, delayed by an impossible fraction of time. Then, the air folded inward on itself. The sound it made was subtle but terrifying, a quiet cracking, as if the fabric of existence had exhaled under too much pressure. Lior stood in the center of the room, his outline bending, warping, fragmenting into streaks of light. His presence no longer felt stable, no longer tethered to this plane. I could feel it in the bones, the way gravity shifted around him, as though reality itself was trying to decide whether to keep or release him. The electronic devices around us began to fail one by one. The clock stopped. The lamp dimmed to black. The radio sputtered, whispering fragments of voices in languages that did not belong to Earth. The hum of the refrigerator deepened into a low vibration that resonated inside my chest before fading into silence. It wasn't the power that had gone, it was reality, losing synchronization. I realized then that everything in our world operated within a specific frequency, and the presence of something beyond it was forcing that rhythm to break. The walls began to ripple like water disturbed by unseen waves. Patterns of faint light appeared on the wooden surface, similar to those I had seen before, but this time they flickered violently, pulsing out of rhythm. The atmosphere thickened with static, and even breathing felt heavier, as though every inhale risked drawing in more than air. Through the distortion, I sensed Lior's warning. He did not speak, but the meaning hit like a pressure in the skull. The longer he remained here, the greater the fracture would become. Two planes of existence, his and mine, were never meant to share the same vibration for long. Prolonged contact would cause collapse, not only of matter, but of perception itself. His light dimmed further, trembling with exhaustion. The once clear aura surrounding him now frayed at the edges, flickering like a candle in its final breath. The frequencies were diverging, tearing him between dimensions. I understood then that his presence came with a cost, not only for him but for everything around him. The bridge we had built between our worlds was collapsing under the weight of truth. The hum deepened until it became a roar that I felt more than heard. The walls twisted, expanding and contracting in rhythm with my heartbeat. Every object in the cabin seemed to exist twice, once as matter, once as vibration. Lior's form flickered violently, a being caught between two realities. I could sense his struggle to hold balance, to remain long enough to finish what he had begun. But it was failing. Then, for the briefest instant, I saw both worlds overlap, the physical and the luminous. The cabin and the field of light coexisted, layered like reflections on rippling water. And within that convergence, I understood the price of knowing. To touch the infinite is to risk breaking the fragile illusion of solidity that holds our world together. The truth was too vast for form, and as the final tremor passed through the air, Lior's glow dimmed into silence, leaving behind only the echo of his presence. A frequency fading slowly, like a song remembered after waking. The following night arrived without stars. The sky was heavy and electric, a vast field of static pressing against the earth. The air carried a metallic scent, the kind that precedes lightning. But no storm came. I could sense it before I heard it, the deep, rhythmic vibration of something unnatural moving through the clouds. The sound grew until it became unmistakable. Engines cutting through the upper atmosphere in tight, deliberate formation. The forest trembled as beams of pale light swept through the trees, scanning patterns into the darkness. They had found us. Far above, the silhouettes of aircraft circled in slow loops, their navigation lights winking like distant, artificial stars. The faint hum of their engines resonated through the ground beneath my feet, vibrating with precision born of suspicion. They were searching for something they could not name, something they did not understand but feared instinctively. The instruments on those machines would be screaming with readings that defied their physics, fluctuations in magnetic fields, spikes in radiation, distortions in gravity. They were seeing what human minds had always mistaken for danger. Inside the cabin, the air quivered. Lior's glow had faded to a dim pulse, his form more transparent than ever. His energy stretched thin between dimensions. His thoughts reached me not as words but as tones that carried meaning like melodies made of truth. They think heaven is a weapon. They always have. The realization struck me with quiet horror. Humanity had always looked upward with curiosity, but had built its instruments out of fear. Every signal from the unknown was interpreted as threat. Every encounter with the divine had been turned into war. Through the window, beams of light swept closer, cutting across the treetops, illuminating the roof of the cabin for brief, haunting moments. The hum of their machines deepened until the air itself seemed to vibrate in protest. The invisible rift between worlds that had begun earlier was now drawing attention not only from the cosmic, but from the terrestrial. I knew what they sought. They had intercepted the resonance, the same frequency that had torn open the sky. To them, it was energy. To Lior, it was memory. And to me, it had become revelation. I felt a decision forming, heavy and irreversible. They would soon land. They would come with their questions, their instruments, their containment protocols. They would see Lior not as a messenger but as a specimen, a thing to be studied, restrained, silenced. I could reveal him, prove everything I had seen, bring truth to a world starved for meaning. Or I could protect him, preserve what was sacred by letting it remain invisible. The choice was not between truth and secrecy, but between knowledge and faith. The rumble of the aircraft grew louder, shaking dust from the rafters. I looked toward the faint shimmer of Lior's form, and even without words, I understood his request. Some truths are not meant to be possessed. They are meant to be remembered. He had risked everything to return, and if he was discovered, the world would tear him apart in its attempt to measure the divine. Outside, the night throbbed with artificial light, humanity's search for certainty blazing across the forest like a wound. Inside, the air pulsed with a dying radiance. I felt the weight of both worlds pressing against me, one demanding evidence, the other asking for trust. And in that moment, I realized that heaven's greatest secret was not hidden by the divine, but by our own inability to see without wanting to own. The engines roared closer. The walls of the cabin trembled. I stood between light and shadow, between science and faith, knowing that the next choice would decide not only what survived, but what was remembered. The night stretched thin, holding its breath between worlds. The hum of engines above the forest began to fade, swallowed by the weight of distance, yet their presence lingered like an afterimage. The air inside the cabin grew still again, but not peaceful, expectant. charged with the quiet tension that precedes revelation. Lior's light was dim now, no brighter than the flicker of a dying ember. The edges of his form trembled, unraveling into fine threads of radiance that drifted through the air like dust caught in a shaft of sunlight. I could feel his essence thinning, each pulse of his presence pulling at the fabric of reality. He was leaving. The realization sank into me slowly, the way dawn creeps into the bones after a long night. I wanted to speak, to ask him to stay, but the thought died before it reached my lips. Words were too small to contain the gravity of what was passing between us. Instead, Lior moved closer, his light brushing against my awareness. It was not touch, but memory familiar, warm, and ancient. Then, without sound, the world shifted once more, and I was no longer in the cabin. The darkness around me dissolved into brilliance. It was not the cold white of physical light, but a warmth that wrapped around consciousness like silk. Shapes began to form within it. First faint, then clearer. I knew before I saw. She stood there, not as she had in life, but as light shaped into remembrance. My wife. Her presence carried the same frequency as music remembered from childhood, a melody known by the heart before the mind recalls its notes. Her eyes shimmered with recognition, not surprise, as though she had been waiting just beyond the edge of sight all this time. She smiled through tears that glowed like liquid glass. Every fragment of grief within me cracked open under that smile. The years of silence, the weight of loneliness, the ache of absence, all melted away until only the truth remained. I was never alone. The distance between the living and the dead was an illusion born from the blindness of matter. She reached out, and though our hands did not touch, I felt her presence ripple through me like light moving through water. And then came her voice, not spoken, not heard, but felt in every corner of my being. You were never alone. You just forgot the sound of heaven. Those words carried more than comfort. They were remembrance. The sound of heaven was not a choir or a song. It was connection, the resonance that binds every soul to every other, the music of existence itself. I understood then that grief is not separation, but the echo of love trying to find its way home. The vision began to fade, her light dissolving into the brilliance surrounding her, merging with it until there was no boundary between them. For a moment, I thought I would follow. But something, perhaps mercy, perhaps purpose, pulled me back. The cabin returned, dim and quiet. The glow that had been Lior was fading into transparency. I could feel his gratitude, a final pulse of warmth flowing through the air like a farewell breath. Then he was gone, leaving only the faintest shimmer, like starlight remembering where it once fell. The silence that followed was profound, not empty but complete. Outside, the first traces of dawn touched the horizon, painting the forest in silver. I sat there, surrounded by the fading hum of the world, and understood that heaven was not above or after it was here, woven through every heartbeat, every memory, every act of love. And for the first time since her passing, I felt no loss at all, only the enduring light of connection that death could never silence. Dawn arrived softly, carrying the scent of rain and the muted chorus of waking birds. The storm that had haunted the night was gone, replaced by a pale stillness that felt neither peaceful nor natural. The first light broke through the trees and spilled across the floorboards, and in that faint glow, I saw that the air itself had changed. The hum that once filled the cabin, the subtle, living vibration that had lingered since Lior's arrival was gone. The silence that remained was absolute, too clean, too deliberate. It was the kind of silence that feels constructed, as if the universe itself had drawn a curtain over what had happened. The space where Lior had stood was empty now, not merely of presence, but of energy. The faint luminescence that had once haloed his form had vanished completely, leaving behind no trace of warmth, no residual glow. Even the air felt heavier, like a room after prayer, when all that remains is stillness and memory. My eyes drifted to the corner, where the walls had once been etched with impossible light. The markings that had pulsed and hummed, breathing like veins of living radiance, were fading fast. Each line dissolved into the wood like mist retreating from sunlight, until only faint shadows remained, ghosts of geometry, echoes of meaning. I searched for proof, for something tangible, something I could hold against the encroaching doubt that already pressed at the edges of my mind. The camera still sat where I had left it, the one I had used to record the phenomena, the lights, and Lior's voice, or whatever, passed for his voice. My hands trembled as I reached for it, half afraid, half desperate. The screen lit for a moment, flickering weakly, then blinked into emptiness. Every file, every recording, every image gone. Only static remained, a pale gray nothing, as though reality itself had reached inside the machine and rewritten it clean. I moved through the cabin in a daze, searching every corner. The smell of ozone had faded, replaced by the damp scent of morning earth. The blankets were still folded where I had left them. The table still bore the faint scorch marks from the candles. Everything seemed painfully ordinary again. Yet, beneath the quiet normalcy, I could still feel the residue of something vast. It wasn't absence. It was compression, as if an entire universe had been folded tightly into the air and sealed away. It was only when I returned to the desk that I saw it, the single mark that had not faded. A symbol carved into the wood, precise and symmetrical, glowing faintly beneath the thin film of morning light. It pulsed once, then stilled, as though aware of being seen. The shape was familiar yet untranslatable, an arrangement of curves and intersecting lines that seemed to shift when I looked at it directly. It was both language and silence, both message and riddle. I knew instinctively that it was not meant to be read. It was meant to be remembered. I traced my fingers over it, expecting texture, but the surface was smooth, warm to the touch, almost alive. The moment my skin brushed it, I felt a hum deep in my bones, a faint vibration that was not sound but recognition. The symbol was not just a remnant, it was a seed. As the sun climbed higher, its light fell across the desk, catching the carved pattern until it shimmered faintly, like the reflection of a forgotten star. And in that shimmer, I thought I saw motion just for an instant, a flicker of blue light bending, forming, vanishing again. It was not Lior, not entirely, but something that remembered him. Then it was gone, leaving only sunlight, only silence, and the mark that refused to fade. The recordings were erased, the symbols dissolved, and the world had returned to its ordinary rhythm. But I understood, with a certainty beyond proof, that nothing had truly vanished. The mark was more than memory. It was a reminder, a doorway, disguised as wood, waiting for the right vibration to open once more. Weeks passed before I could bring myself to share what had happened. The world outside the cabin had not changed, yet it felt hollow, as if stripped of some hidden layer I could no longer unsee. The news spoke of politics, storms, and markets, the endless hum of routine that masked the deeper currents of reality. But within me, the hum of another kind remained, a quiet resonance that followed me through every waking hour. An echo of Lior's light, still embedded somewhere in my bones. I began to write everything I remembered, every vision, every symbol, every sound that wasn't sound. I wrote until my hands ached, until the words blurred into numbers, until the memories felt less like mine and more like transmissions from another consciousness. When I finally submitted the work, my study of what I called the heaven frequency, it spread faster than I expected. Academic journals refused it, dismissing it as pseudoscience dressed in mysticism. Colleagues avoided me, whispering the same word again and again: delusion. They said grief had driven me to fantasy, that isolation had fractured my perception of truth. I did not argue. Their disbelief was predictable, almost comforting. It proved the world was still clinging to its illusions of safety. But the universe does not wait for permission to reveal itself. It began quietly. A small hospital in Norway reported unexplained electromagnetic fluctuations during a patient's passing. Monitors flickered, lights dimmed, and for 7 seconds after the heart had stopped, energy readings spiked far beyond medical explanation. Then, similar incidents appeared elsewhere: Japan, Argentina, Canada. Machines registered frequencies they could not identify, subtle yet consistent, always occurring within moments of death. Nurses described hearing faint harmonics, like choral tones without source. Some patients revived after cardiac arrest spoke of seeing patterns of light woven through air, geometric and shifting, identical to the mark etched into my desk. Soon, the phenomenon could no longer be ignored. Laboratories began measuring the anomalies, though no one could agree on what they were. The readings showed coherence, organized energy, not random static. It behaved like thought. News networks sensationalized it, calling it proof of the soul. Governments launched private studies under new names, desperate to contain what they could not categorize. The word frequency became both a revelation and a threat. Letters began arriving, emails, handwritten notes, recorded testimonies. Near-death survivors describing the same vision. Corridors of light, pulsing like veins of memory. Voices speaking in harmony. And one phrase repeated across languages and continents: "You were never alone. You just forgot the sound of heaven." The world's reaction divided itself along familiar lines. The faithful called it divine. The skeptics called it mass hysteria. The scientists called it unexplained. But I knew it was all of them and more. What humanity had touched was not new. It had always been there, hidden beneath the noise of thought, waiting for resonance strong enough to awaken it. Sometimes, when night falls and the world grows still, I can hear it faintly again, the low hum beneath the silence, steady as breath, ancient as creation. The heaven frequency, the pulse of memory that bridges the living and the infinite. And I wonder if somewhere, beyond the walls of perception, Lior is still listening, guiding the awakening he once began. Because now, whether the world believes or not, the signal has already spread. And once you've heard it, you can never return to silence. Years passed, though time had begun to lose its ordinary shape. Seasons came and went, but the rhythm of the world no longer held meaning as it once did. I had learned to live between frequencies, half tethered to the earth, half listening to something that pulsed beneath it. The cabin remained my sanctuary, untouched by visitors, buried in the stillness of the forest. The world had moved on, yet the memory of that night, the lights, the voices, the fracture in the sky never truly faded. There were moments, in the quiet before dawn, when I could still feel Lior's presence flicker faintly at the edges of perception, like a heartbeat too distant to measure but too familiar to forget. The world beyond my solitude had changed. Technology advanced, theories multiplied, and the heaven frequency became a phrase spoken in reverence or ridicule. Hospitals now monitored it without understanding, recording bursts of light at the moment of death, still calling them anomalies. But I no longer needed proof. I had seen what lay beyond the veil of forgetting, and belief had become unnecessary. What remained was remembrance, a kind of knowing that hums quietly beneath the skin, asking nothing, needing nothing. On the anniversary of the night Lior vanished, the storm returned. It came without warning, rolling across the valley like the heartbeat of something enormous waking beneath the earth. The trees bent low, their branches thrashing in the wind. Rain struck the windows with relentless rhythm, and the thunder grew so loud it sounded less like weather and more like a voice calling across worlds. The lights flickered once, then went out completely. I lit no candles. I simply waited, because deep inside, I already knew what was coming. Then it came, the sound that had begun everything. 3 soft knocks at the door. Slow, measured, gentle. I felt no fear this time, only recognition. The air thickened with warmth, the kind that hums with memory rather than heat. A faint glow crept beneath the doorframe, not harsh like lightning, but living, pulsing in rhythm with my heart. When I opened it, the forest beyond was alive with light. The rain had turned to silver mist, suspended mid-air, every droplet vibrating with quiet luminescence. And there, standing in the doorway, was the glow. It was smaller now, softer, less overwhelming. The shape was that of a child again, but the light within it pulsed with something older, wiser, infinite. I didn't need to ask. I already knew this was not a beginning or an end, but a return. The air around us resonated, and within that resonance, I heard the voice. It was higher, gentler, the tone of something newly born yet ancient beyond measure. We're opening the door again. This time, you remember the way. The world fell silent. The storm stopped mid-breath. The mist hung in stillness, glowing brighter with every heartbeat. The cabin dissolved into light. The forest folded into sound, and I felt the boundary between here and beyond vanish like breath on glass. There was no fear, only familiarity, the feeling of coming home to a place I had never truly left. As the light expanded, swallowing everything, I saw the mark once carved into my desk appear again before me, shining, alive, resonating like the chord of a great cosmic song. It was the same pattern, the same memory, the same door. I stepped forward, and for a moment, I thought I heard laughter, the laughter of a soul remembering itself after lifetimes of silence. The light grew brighter until there was no cabin, no storm, no separation at all, only harmony, only the frequency of heaven flowing through everything that ever was or would be. And as the glow enveloped me, I understood that the journey had never been about death or revelation. It was about remembering the sound that creation itself was built upon, the sound we once called heaven. And this time, I did remember.